Hello, everybody. Back again for chapter 2. Very excited to be here. Excited to get to see what our characters are up to, even though it's only the second day. Um, just wanted to pass on a note. I was just watching a video about, you guessed it, the coronavirus. Um, and just like the amount of ventilators that we have in the US is not going to cut it. So if you can just please stay inside and only go outside if you really must. But it's just like it's so important to help each other by just chilling inside, listening to me reading an audiobook. And we can all have a safe time. Just and I know this is stressful to talk about and stuff like that, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents. I will hold off till like 3:04 again. Until then, if you ever just want to pop up into the comments to say who you are, I would love to see that. You don't have to. You can keep your secrets, and I will keep mine. I'm also going to try and read from different places in my house every day, audio permitting. Today, I am reading from my bed. Tomorrow, I'm probably going to stay in my room for the first couple of days and then see where else we want. As you can see, I have a long list of things to get to. Um, these are all unread, and then there's a whole nother stack going that way, and then another one going up. So I got a lot of unread books, but I like to reread things because why branch out when you could branch in? um, so let's talk about what happened yesterday. So yesterday we were introduced to Newland Archer, the debonair bachelor of the New York Society in the 1870s. He's at the opera. He's making eyes at his fiancée, May Welland, who's very young and, as he thinks, naive and uneducated, and he's very excited to educate her. But then a mysterious new woman appears, whose name we do not know, but who the foremost expert on New York society, Stilton Jackson, um, thinks or is surprised to see her emergence. So, without any further ado, I'm gonna get this thing started. All right. The Age of Innocence, Chapter 2. Newland Archer, during this brief episode, had been thrown into a strange state of embarrassment. It was annoying that the box that was thus attracting the undivided attention of masculine New York should be that in which his betrothed was seated between her mother and aunt, and for a moment he could not identify the lady in the Empire dress, nor imagine why her presence created such excitement among the initiated. Then light dawned on him, and with it came a momentary rush of indignation. No, indeed, no one would have thought the Mingotts would have tried it on. But they undoubtedly had, for the low-toned comments behind him left no doubt in Archer's mind that the young woman was May Welland's cousin, the cousin always referred to in the family as poor Ellen Olenska. Archer knew that she had suddenly arrived from Europe a day or two previously. He had even heard from Miss Welland, not disapprovingly, that she had been to see poor Ellen, who was staying with old Mrs. Mingott. Archer entirely approved of family solidarity, and one of the qualities he most admired in the Mingotts was their resolute championship of the few black sheep that their blameless stock had produced. There was nothing mean or ungenerous in the young man's heart, and he was glad that his future wife should not have been restrained by false prudery from being kind in private to earn her unhappy cousin. But to receive Countess Olenska in the family circle was a different thing from producing her in public, at the opera of all places, and in the very box with the young girl whose engagement to him, Newland Archer, was to be announced within a few weeks. No, he felt as old Silverton Jackson felt. He did not think the Mingotts would have tried it on. He knew, of course, that whatever man dared within Fifth Avenue's limits, that old Mrs. Manson Mingott, the matriarch of the line, would dare. He had always admired the high and mighty old lady who, in spite of having been only Catherine Spicer of Staten Island, with a father mysteriously discredited and neither money nor position enough to make people forget it, had allied herself with the head of the wealthy Mingott line, married two of her daughters to foreigners, an Italian marquis and an English banker, and put the crowning touch to her audacities by building a large house of pale cream-colored stone, when brown sandstone seemed much the only wear, as a frock coat in the afternoon, in an inaccessible wilderness near Central Park. Old Mrs. Mingott's foreign daughters had become a legend. They never came back to see their mother, and the latter being, like many persons of active mind and dominating will, sedentary and corpulent in her habits, and philosophically remained at home. But the cream-colored house, supposed to be modeled on the private hotels of the Parisian aristocracy, was there as a visible proof of her moral courage, and she throned it among pre-revolutionary furniture and souvenirs of the Tuileries of Louis Napoleon, where she had shone in her middle age, as placidly as if there were nothing peculiar in living above 34th Street, or in having French windows that opened like doors instead of sashes that pulled up. Everyone, including Mr. Silverton Jackson, was agreed that old Catherine had never had beauty, a gift which, in the eyes of New York, justified every success and excused a certain number of failings. Unkind people said that, like her imperial namesake, she had won her way to success by strength of will and hardness of heart, and a kind of haughty effrontery that was somehow justified by the extreme decency and dignity of her own private life. Mr. Manson Mingott had died when she was only 28, and had tied up the money with an additional caution born of the general distrust of the Spicers. But his bold young, excuse me, but his bold young widow went her way fearlessly, mingled freely in foreign society, married her daughters in heaven knew what corrupt and fashionable circles, hobnobbed with dukes and ambassadors, associated familiarly with papists, entertained opera singers, and was the intimate friend of Madame Taglioni. And all the while, as Silverton Jackson was the first to proclaim, there had never been a breath on her reputation, the only respect, he always added, in which she differed from the earlier Catherine. Mrs. Manson Mingott had long since succeeded in untying her husband's fortune, and had lived in affluence for half a century, but memories of her early straits had made her excessively thrifty, and though when she bought a dress or piece of furniture, she took care that it should be of the best, she could not bring herself to spend much on the transient pleasures of the table. Therefore, for totally different reasons, her food was as poor as Mrs. Archer's, and her wines did nothing to redeem them. Her relatives considered that the penury of her table discredited the Mingott name, which had always been associated with good living. But people continued to come to her in spite of the made dishes and flat champagne, and in reply to the remonstrances of her son Lovell, who tried to retrieve the family credit by having the best chef in New York, she used to say laughingly, "What's the use of two good cooks in one family now that I've married the girls and can't eat sauces?" Newland Archer, as he mused on these things, had once more turned his eyes toward the Mingott box. He saw that Mrs. Welland and her sister-in-law were facing their semicircle of critics with the Mingottian aplomb, the Mingottian aplomb, which old Catherine had inculcated in all her tribe, and that only May Welland betrayed by a heightened color, perhaps due to the knowledge that he was watching her, a sense of the gravity of the situation. As for the cause of the commotion, she sat gracefully in her corner of the box, her eyes fixed on the stage, and revealing, as she leaned forward, a little more shoulder and bosom than New York was accustomed to seeing, at least in ladies who had reason for wishing to pass unnoticed. Few things seemed to Newland Archer more awful than an offense against taste, that far-off divinity of whom form was the mere visible representation and vicegerent. Madame Olenska's pale and serious face appealed to his fancy as suited to the occasion and to her unhappy situation, but the way her dress, which had no tucker, sloped away from her thin shoulders shocked and troubled him. He hated to think of May Wellens being exposed to the influence of a young woman so careless of the dictates of taste. After all, he heard one of the young men begin behind him. Everybody talked through the Mephistopheles and Martha scenes. After all, just what happened? Well, she left him. Nobody attempts to deny that. He's an awful brute, isn't he? Continued the young inquirer, a candid Thorley, who was evidently preparing to enter the list as the ladies' champion. The very worst. I knew him at Nice, said Lawrence Lefferts with authority. A half-paralyzed, white, sneering fellow. Rather a handsome head, but eyes with lots of lashes. Well, I'll tell you the sort. When he wasn't with woman, he was collecting china. Paying a price for both, I understand. There was a general laugh, and the young champion said, Well, then, she bolted with his secretary. Oh, I see. The champion's face fell. It didn't last long, though. I heard of her a few months later living alone in Venice. I believe Lovell Mingott went out to get her. He said she was desperately unhappy. That's all right. But this parading her at the opera's another thing. Perhaps, young Thorley hazarded, she's too unhappy to be left at home. This was greeted by an irreverent laugh, and the youth blushed deeply, and tried to look as if he had meant to insinuate what knowing people called a double entendre. Well, it's queer to have brought Miss Welland, anyhow, someone said in a low tone, with a side glance at Archer. Oh, that's part of the campaign. Granny's orders, no doubt, Lefferts laughed. When the old lady does a thing, she does it thoroughly. The act was ending, and there was a general stir in the box. Suddenly, Newland Archer felt himself impelled to decisive action. The desire to be the first man to enter Mrs. Mingott's box, to proclaim to the waiting world his engagement to May Welland, and to see her through whatever difficulties her cousin's anomalous situation might involve her. This impulse had abruptly overruled all scruples and hesitations, and sent him hurrying through the red corridors to the further side of the house. As he entered the box, his eyes met Miss Welland's, and he saw that she had instantly understood his motive, though the family dignity, which both considered so high a virtue, would not permit her to tell him so. The persons of their world lived in an atmosphere of faint implications and pale delicacies, and the fact that he and she understood each other without a word seemed to the young man to bring them nearer than any explanation would have done. Her eyes said, You see why Mamma brought me, and his answered, I would not for the world have had you stay away. Oh, you know my niece, Countess Olenska, Mrs. Welland inquired as she shook hands with her future son-in-law. Archer bowed without extending his hand, as was the custom on being introduced to a lady, and Ellen Olenska bent her head slightly, keeping her own pale-gloved hands clasped on her huge fan of eagle feathers. Having greeted Mrs. Lovell Mingott, a large blonde lady in creaking satin, he sat down beside his betrothed and said in a low tone, I hope you've told Madame Olenska that we're engaged. I want everybody to know. I want you to let me announce it this evening at the ball. Miss Welland's face grew rosy as the dawn, and she looked at him with radiant eyes. If you can persuade Mamma, she said. But why should we charge what is already settled? He made no answer, but that which his eyes returned. She added, still more confidently smiling, Tell my cousin yourself, I give you leave. She says she used to play with you when you were children. She made way for him by pushing back her chair, and promptly, and a little ostentatiously, with the desire that the whole house should see what he was doing. Archer seated himself at the Countess Olenska's side. We did used to play together, didn't we? She asked, turning her grave eyes to his. You were a horrid boy, and kissed me once behind a door. But it was your cousin, Vandy Newland, who never looked at me, that I was in love with. Her glance swept the horseshoe curve of boxes. Ah, how this brings it all back to me. I see everybody here in knickerbockers and pantalettes, she said, with her trailing, slightly foreign accent, her eyes returning to his face. Agreeable as their expression was, the young man was shocked that they should reflect so unseemly a picture of the august tribunal before which, at the very moment, her case was being tried. Nothing could be in worse taste than misplaced flippancy, and he answered somewhat stiffly, "Yes, you have been away a very long time." "Oh, centuries and centuries, so long," she said, "that I'm sure I'm dead and buried, and this dear old place is heaven." For which reason he could not define, struck Newland Archer as an even more disrespectful way of describing New York society. That's the end of chapter 2. How lovely. How, like, what incredible language. Meta Valenska is such an incredible and powerful character, and I don't know if it was the way that I was reading her or just the way that she is, but her voice has such presence. And as you could probably tell, Michelle Pfeiffer plays her in the movie, and it's just I don't know if she's like my number one choice for that role, but she really fulfills it. I want to read more, but I'm gonna hold myself off and just hold myself to the one chapter a day for now. Couple things. Um, there are 34 chapters. We're done with 32 of them. So no, no, we're only done with two. We're done with two chapters. Hey Chipper, hello. I'm so glad you're here. Um, so 32 days from now, we will be finished with this book, and maybe I'll read another one. I don't really want to order a book because I don't want to tax delivery workers right now. So I'm kind of gonna deal with what I have, and I'm also trying to stick to classics, but that's like 32 days from now. So I'm also thinking that like on Fridays I'll do something fun. So I think I'll do a I have a bottle of vodka, which I evacuated from UCLA. So maybe one Friday I'll do a, a drunk reading. I also think it would be really fun and funny to like if there's a ball scene to just wear one of my old prom dresses because they're just sitting in my closet chilling. And I think that would be really cool. So, with that, thank you to the three of you who I can see have tuned in. It means a lot to me. Really glad to share this novel with you. I'm so into it. She's such a good writer. So I will hopefully see you all here tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Au revoir until then.